D99 by H.B. Fyfe, Chapter 5. This LibriVox recording is in public domain. When Beryl walked in, Westervelt was at one of the tall windows with Simonetta, dialing filter combinations to make the most of the setting sun. They had the edge of it showing as a deep crimson ball beside another building in the vicinity. "What are you two doping out?" asked the blonde. "Some disappearing trick?" Simonetta laughed as Westervelt shoved the dial setting to afternoon normal. "It's an idea," he said, scowling at Beryl. "For underwater?" she demanded mockingly. "Ever hear of a squid?" retorted Westervelt. "They hide themselves underwater. Maybe a cloud of dye would be as good as a filter." "Willie, that is an idea," said Simonetta. "You ought to tell Mr. Smith." Westervelt looked at her sourly. Now Beryl knew that they'd really been wasting time, and had a point to score against him in their next exchange. "Oh well, I can't hold a thing like that against Cy," he thought. "I can think of people who'd be on the way to Smitty already, calling it their own idea." Beryl had done a ladylike collapse into her chair and crossed her legs. She dug into her purse for cigarettes and requested a light. "Why don't you buy a brand with a lighter in the box?" asked Westervelt. Nevertheless, he walked over to the switchboard cubicle for the office desk lighter that had been appropriated by Pauline. Returning with it after a moment, he lit Beryl's cigarette and inquired, "Well, what did you and Parrish dig up?" "I don't know," she sighed, leaning back. "But boy, did we dig." "Yeah, I thought I heard the shovel clink once," said Westervelt, thinking of the laughter he had heard through the door of the dead file office. Beryl, concerned with her own complaints, ignored him. "We must have looked up 30 or 40 cases," she went on. "I never even heard of most of those places on the newscasts." "Did he find anything that gave him an idea?" asked Simonetta. "Not a thing. There seemed to be some real crazy spots in the records, but nobody ever got in jail at the bottom of an ocean." "You'd think it would have happened sometime," said Simonetta thoughtfully. "I suppose," suggested Westervelt, "that on any planet where Terrans were taken underwater, they didn't live long enough to be one of our cases. On a place like Trident, they usually wouldn't have any trouble. They'd stay on land, and any local life would stay on the sea. It took a nut like Harris to go poking around where he wasn't wanted." "That's what Mr. Parrish hinted," said Beryl. "All I know is that it sounds like a story out of a laughing academy. They shouldn't allow them to get into places like that." "Then we'd all be looking for work," said Westervelt. "Don't complain, Beryl. Maybe it will happen to you someday." The blonde shivered and turned to face her desk. "Not me," she declared. "I'm staying on Terra, even if they do offer me a field trip as a sort of vacation." "Ah, he's already started that line on her," thought Westervelt. "I wonder if there's anything in the files on how to spring a secretary from a penthouse." Leidman and Parrish walked in, the latter pausing to exchange remarks with Pauline, the switchboard operator. A moment later, Smith opened his door as if expecting someone. He must have phoned them for a change, Westervelt realized. "Oh, there you are, Willie," said the chief. "I suppose you might as well sit in on this, too. We might need something, and meanwhile, you can be picking up a tip or two." Westervelt rose and followed the others into Smith's office, where he took a chair by the window. The others clustered around the chief's desk, a vast plateau of silvery plastic strewn with a hodgepodge of paper and tapes. The office itself was like a small museum. The walls were lined with photographs, mostly of poor quality, but showing interesting devices that had been used in various department cases. The ones in which the color was better usually showed Smith in company with 2 or 3 men wearing space uniforms and self-conscious looks. Sometimes a more assured individual was shown in the act of presenting some sort of memento or letter of appreciation to Smith. Leidman and Parrish also appeared in several of the pictures. The record of our best cases, thought Westervelt. The bad ones are buried in the files. Standing along the walls, or on little tables and bases of their own, were a good many models of spaceships, planetary systems, and non-humanoid beings. A few of the latter statues were enough to have made Beryl declare she was perfectly happy to stay out of Smith's office and be someone else's secretary. One model, which Westervelt secretly longed to examine at leisure, showed an entire city with its surrounding landscape on a distant planet. Westervelt tore his attention from the mementos and turned toward the group as Smith settled himself behind the desk. "This is no longer even approximately funny," said the department head. "I've had a few calls put through. Do you know how little we're going to have to work with?" "I gather that it is not very much," said Parrish calmly. "There are less than 50 Terrans on that whole planet," declared Smith, running the fingers of one hand through his already untidy hair. "The nearest colony or friendly spaceport from which we could have equipment sent in is 20-odd light years away." "Well, that could be done," said Leidman mildly. "Oh, of course it could be done," admitted Smith. "But how long do we have to fool around? We don't know under what conditions Harris is being held." Parrish leaned forward to rest his elbows on Smith's desk. "We can deduce some of them pretty well," he suggested. "In the first place, if he got out several messages, which we'll have to assume he did, they must have found some means of providing him with air. He could have lived a while on the air in this submarine he built," said Leidman. "Yes, but in that case he would have used its radio for communication. We have to assume that they pried him out somehow, no?" The others nodded. He wouldn't last too long in a spacesuit even if they pumped in air under pressure, said Leibman judiciously. So they must have built some kind of structure to house him, if only a big tank, said Parrish. Westervelt stirred, then closed his mouth rather than interrupt. Smith, however, had seen the motion and looked up. Speak up, Willie, he invited. It won't sound any sillier than anything else that's been said in this room. I was wondering about these Tridentians, said Westervelt. Does anybody know how they live? Do they have cities built on the sea bottom? If they have water jet vehicles, they certainly have the technical... Smith stopped, as he saw Parrish lean back and roll his eyes toward the ceiling. What now, Pete? He demanded apprehensively. I don't know why that didn't occur to me sooner, groaned Parrish. 100 to 1 they have a nomadic setup. It would be typical with an environment like that. This is worse than we thought. You mean, muttered Smith after a few moments of silence. How can we get a direction fix on a thought? Something like that, said Parrish. I suppose they have bases where they keep permanent manufacturing facilities, probably set up at points where they have access to minerals, unless they know how to extract what they need from the water itself. Nothing hard about that, agreed Smith. I'll have to send out a few more questions. Of course, they'll take the attitude that I should be doing something instead of asking about irrelevant subjects. We're used to that, smiled Parrish, showing his beautiful teeth. Westervelt wondered how broadly he would smile if it were his own responsibility. He had an idea that Parrish might be rather less than half as charming if he were running the operation, and not getting much help from the others in solving the problem. He had to admit, however, that the man had a knack for spotting alien culture patterns. When he had asked his question about the cities, it was merely because he had half-pictured some Terran-style dome underwater and knew that that image was unlikely. Anyway, Parrish was going on, we should probably think of them as being free as birds to go where they like. Even before they developed machines, they probably migrated about their world by swimming. I gather that these other... fish, I suppose we'll have to call them. Thinking fish, murmured Smith sadly. He ran his hand through his hair again. I suppose those things still do, besides other types we still haven't heard of, which would fill the place of Terran animals. So then, we'll have to look for temporary locations, and think in terms of a fast raid rather than a careful penetration. If we could find them, there must be some way we could armor a few spacesuits against pressure and drop down on them, said Leibman. I think I can dig up a weapon or two that will work underwater in a way these clams never thought of. Maybe we could do better to have Swishy, the thinking fish, hypnotize them into bringing Harris back, said Westervelt. They looked at him thoughtfully, and he was horrified to see his joke being taken seriously. He squirmed in his chair by the window, wishing he had kept his mouth shut. I wonder, mused Smith, if they can actually exchange thoughts. They might have natural defenses, said Parrish tentatively. What could we bribe a fish with? Asked Leibman, but hopefully rather than derisively. Smith made another note, then drummed his fingers on his desktop. The four of them sat in silence. Westervelt hoped that the others were engaged in more productive thoughts than his own. It was nice to have their attention, and get the reputation of a bright young man who came up with suggestions. But when they decided upon some reasonable course of action, they might remember him for making a foolish remark. Willie, said Smith, coming to a decision, circulate around and ask the others if they can stick it out a couple of hours tonight. Maybe there's time to pry some useful information out of Trident, and at least get something started before we close down. If I know some guy out in space is working on it, I can sleep anyway. Westervelt left his place by the window and went into the outer office. He told Simonetta and Beryl. The latter acted less than thrilled. Westervelt wondered jealously what kind of date she had scheduled for the evening. He stopped at the window of the switchboard cubbyhole. "Oh, it's you, Willie!" exclaimed Pauline. "Yeah, you can turn on the projector again," he grinned. "What is it, a love movie?" Pauline edged a small tape projector out from under the side of her board. "It's homework, if you have to know," she told him. "That's right, you still go to college," Westervelt recalled. "Why don't you switch to alien psychology? Then you could qualify for office manager around here." "When do we have alien visitors here? Once in a ringed moon." "Who is to say which of the aliens?" said Westervelt. "There are days when I think I could feel more understanding to something with 12 tentacles and a tank of chlorine than to a lot of the mentalities that get loose right in this office. There's a crash program on for the evening, by the way, and Smitty wants the staff to hang on a while." A look of dismay flashed over Pauline's youthful features. "I know. You have class tonight," Westervelt deduced. "Chuck it all. Stay in the file room with Mr. Parrish and you'll learn twice as much." Pauline offered to throw the projector at him, but laughed. Westervelt told her that no one would miss her if she connected a few of the main office phones to outside lines and hooked up the communications room with Smith's desk. He left her wondering if she ought to stay anyhow, and headed for the hall. Halfway along to the communications room, he heard the elevator doors open and close. He stopped and looked back. Around the corner strolled one of the TV men, Joe Rosencrantz. Westervelt looked at his watch and realized that it was a shift change for the communications personnel, who kept touch with the universe 24 hours a day, in case someone somewhere makes a dumb mistake, like Harris, thought Westervelt. They overdo it a little, I think. I suppose it's the typical pride and joy of Terran technical culture to signal halfway across the galaxy to fix something that might have been cured beforehand when Harris was a little boy. I wonder what the psychologist should have done about me to keep me out of a place like this. "Hello, Willie," said Rosencrantz, catching up. "Going to the comm room?" Westervelt admitted as much, and gave the operator a brief outline of the afternoon's developments. Rosencrantz remained unperturbed. "Hope they don't get intoxicated with ingenuity and insist on sending messages all over," he grunted. "I was looking forward to a quiet night shift." They went in to tell Colburn, who took it well. He pointed out to Westervelt that he would in no case have been concerned with the overtime operation. When he was relieved, he was relieved. Period. "I forget this crazy place the minute the elevator door closes behind me," he said, grinning, having handed over to Rosencrantz his log and a few unofficial comments about traffic he had heard during recent hours. "There are some who wait till they hit the street, but I believe in a clean cut. I walk in, push main floor, and everything else goes blank." He went out the door, refusing to dignify their jeers by any defense, and made for the elevators. By the time he reached the corner of the hall, he had slipped into his topcoat. He pushed the button to call the elevator. When it arrived, Colburn stepped inside and rode down to the 95th floor. He switched to a public express elevator, which picked up several other people before becoming an express at the 75th floor. "Lived through it again," he muttered to a man next to him as they reached the main floor. He joined the growing stream of office workers flowing through the lobby of the building, taking for granted the kaleidoscope play of decorative lights on the translucent ceiling. He noticed them when they suddenly went out. There was first silence, then a babble of voices until small emergency lights went on. Someone spoke of a fuse blowing. Colburn looked outside and saw no streetlights or illuminated signs. His first thought was power for his set upstairs. "No, that's special," he told himself. "But I'd better call and see if the elevators are working." End of Chapter 5.